So I wanted to ask you both, right? Someone came to me quite recently, very interested in the evolutionary astrology material, wants to come on board and study with us, but she had a question, and it was about house systems. And in her studies, she has found that the whole house system is something she's very enamored with, and really enjoys looking at her own chart in that way. And evolutionary astrology works with the Porphyry house system. That was Jeffrey Wolf Green's preferred house system. So, what would you say to this person who is interested in study but has that kind of yeah, maybe trepidation?
Well, I hear it a lot, with students that come into the level one, who are coming from a traditional point of view, using the whole sign house and wondering why we use the Porphyry house system. And I give them the history of how evolutionary astrology came to use the Porphyry house system. And that is that Jeffrey and my mother Maggie in our bookstore were originally using Placidus house system, and they both were enjoying Rujar's work. And Dane Rujar uses Campanus house system. So they decided to do independent case studies with every client, doing a chart in the Placidus house system and a chart in the Campanus house system. And then they did that for a number of months and came together and compared notes and decided that the Campanus house system was the house system that they would use. Now, that didn't last very long in the scheme of things because Jeffrey then came to mom and said, I've found this house system. It is the original quadrant-based house system, Porphyry, and I'd like us to explore this. So they did another case study. And then they did, for every client, they did a chart in Campanus and they did one in Porphyry. And they did that for quite a while and then came together and compared notes and were wholeheartedly on board with the Porphyry house system. And understanding the Porphyry house system is to understand that it is an equal quadrant. It's not an absolute division of the sky. I mean, all house systems are a division of the sky, but without getting into the weeds of the details, it takes from ascendant to the fourth house cusp and takes that whole number and divides it by three. And that is how we develop those houses. And so, um, for me, throughout the years, as students have challenged, why are you using Porphyry? I've been using Placidus, I've been using Coke. I love my chart in these house systems, and in Porphyry, it changes it. And so was disconcerting for a number of students. And I just basically said, let's do a comparison in class. So anybody who says my chart, I like my Saturn in this house and not in this house, I said, well, let's discuss it. And I said that for every chart I've ever done and looked at it differently in another house system, I have never, not once, seen the value of evolutionary astrology in those other house systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that, particularly with whole sign houses, it completely falls apart for evolutionary astrology. There isn't, it just absolutely, for me, does not work in any way, shape, or form.
And just to reiterate as well, too, that Porphyry house system is sort of an equal house system, focusing on the ascendant and midheaven and dividing the quadrants equally, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I mean by that. The quadrants are equally divided, which shifts the house cusps often, and that is for me that's vastly important when I moved to the Porphyry house system. And I have to back up a little bit here in terms of coming into astrology all those years ago. That was really all the different house systems. People were experimenting with them. I don't think Capanus was as popular as Placidus, and then there was Coke for a while, and I think that people weren't really all that settled. I mean, everybody's got their kind of favorites in the branches and so on. But since evolutionary astrology started, expanding there, more people have used the Porphyry house system and found that it worked.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, it is an equal quadrant, not an equal house.
Yeah, yes, equal quadrant.
When
Yes,
you
yes.
when you take that divided amount by three, you're adding that amount to the ascendant to get the second house, adding that amount to the second house to get the third house, and it should come out when you add it to get to the fourth house. And then you have to do the second quadrant because the first and the third quadrant are equal, the same, and the third and the fourth quadrant, excuse me, the second and the fourth quadrants are equal as well. They're exactly the same opposite signs. And in Porphyry, you get interceptions, yes, with equal house and whole sign house, it wipes out interceptions. And there are a lot of folks who are born in extreme northern latitudes that really do like an equal house or a whole sign house because it evens things out. I've certainly done a porphyry chart for someone who was born in the northern parts of Alaska, and every single planet was crammed into the sixth house. I mean, there were,
Mhm.
everything in all the signs, everything was below the horizon. So, I mean, I gave it an attempt to read, but it was difficult. But I still believe very wholeheartedly in the Porphyry house system. I think there's different methods, different house systems for different use. As with everything, I think it speaks to us in certain ways. That's why we use evolutionary astrology. It speaks to us in a particular way, and the house system matches our methodology.
And I think that that's a valid point as well, too. I recently did a client who was, you know, Placidus was her favorite, and she said she couldn't relate to her son being in a different house. But she didn't have the evolutionary astrology background to understand what that difference was, and I think that she enjoyed, the session and got a lot out of that. So it's like coming in with an open mind.
For sure.
And I know that Jeffrey talked a lot about the threes and the
Trinity.
division, yeah, the Trinity, which is also kind of philosophically a part of evolutionary astrology, since when we're looking at a chart, we're looking at the interplay of spirit, soul, and ego, and which, there's a whole discussion on the water triad as that representation. But I can say from my personal experience, and Rose, maybe you remember this, when Llewellyn published the compilation book that you put together, they cast a chart that for a past life case study I had, which
Hmm.
is, again, my case studies are people's actual memories, not an interpretation. It is their exact, regression. And then compared to the chart so that it really illuminates the dynamics, specifically what evolutionary astrology is dealing with, these kinds of wounds and strengths that we bring in from the past, the kind of eternal life of the soul. So Llewellyn cast it in a different house system, and it moved Pluto from, I think it was the third to the fourth, totally blew the interpretation, right? And I don't even think it was cuspy when it's in Porphyry. And I see it a lot because in teaching regression, and I also teach regression to astrologers, right? And they all want to bring their charts, and we're in workshops for 5 days, and they're doing regressions, and we're looking at the chart and comparing it to the chart. And some of them will go to Placidus and look at it. And if there is a house change, specifically with Pluto and the nodes, right? As we know in evolutionary astrology, that's going to change the understanding of the experience of the soul. And it's so literal. It's like they're like, this doesn't work in Placidus based on their own experience, right? In their own regression. So for me, I think like what Laura said, and I know you agree too, Rose. There's many ways to divide the sky. Um, there's different systems, just as many ways as there are to use astrology, right? There's medical astrology and psychological astrology and horary astrology. And people that don't do astrology look at that and that confuses them, right? That how specific symbols can mean different things and why it's not just this one thing. And certainly it's just been proven over time for evolutionary astrology. Porphyry is the one that best describes or contains the energy of the understanding of the soul through its many lifetimes, how it's on its journey home, what's happened along the way, right? And what it's doing today.
Yeah. I always like to, being a first house Pluto, find where in me I can relate to that. Looking at the different house systems, any of the quadrant-based systems, my chart doesn't change. Everything's angular, and so the angles don't change. I don't, Nothing changes in my chart. It's just a fixed chart. And then when I move it to whole sign houses, the whole thing just changes so fundamentally. I go from a first house Pluto to a second house Pluto, and I'm like, not even a little. Not even a little.
For all the years I've known you, Laura, no.
No.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely
not going to
not.
work for you.